Southwest Harbor Public Library. I'm I'm Jim Casey. I'm with the board here, and I would like to start out by thanking some of our partners with this event, Jessup Library and the Northeast Harbor Library helped promote this, and along with the Mount Desert Island Historical Society and the Musson Group. So we're recording this for tonight, so it'll be available on the library's YouTube channel. And Kate will pick up. We'll be running the board, and she'll be forwarding questions from people that are watching. And when we get into Q&A, we'll be passing this mic around, and if you each will help out with that. So tonight we're delighted to have Raney Bench. She's the executive director of the MDI Historical Society. And last fall, she gave a talk here and wicked storms and survival and sea level rise, and was very well received. And that is also on the YouTube channel. In addition to that, she's worked all over the island, including Abbey Museum, the executive director of the Chebacco Water Museum. And I've run into her periodically many times through the years. And we have folks from the Musson Group, Noel, Musson, and Susanne Hall. They consult on land use planning, community economic issues, and they're right here in Southwest Harbor, and I suspect they do a whole lot of other things that I don't even know about. Noel grew up in MDI, and he has over 25 years of experience working on planning, economic development, and permitting. Suzanne's a urban planning professional, and her experience ranges from working with small local nonprofits like to New York City government agencies and large regional planning organizations. So she certainly has a broad range of experience. And all three of our speakers are part of this collaborative effort to find housing solutions for MDI, arguably the biggest issue of our time. I'll be really interested to hear how this historic background in this issue can help inform our real life choices today and help solve this very complex and important housing dilemma. I'd like you to please warmly welcome Raney, Noel, and Susanne.
Thank you, Jim, and thanks to the Southwest Harbor Public Library for hosting us this evening. It's a pleasure to be here with you both in person, and we have quite a number of people online with us as well. So I believe that history is relevant. I believe that we can learn really important lessons from our past that inform how we understand and shape the decisions around us today. Even in very complex situations like housing, we can look to the ways that our ancestors have dealt with complex issues in their own time to be able to try to tease out lessons, to pick tools out that we might be able to apply to those situations that we have and are facing here today. So I hope you don't think this is a bait and switch. We are going to talk about housing, but I'm going to start with 3 historic vignettes that typify how our ancestors went about making really complicated decisions and sort of tease out some lessons that we can take from those situations. And then we're going to talk about the history of housing on the island. And then we're going to apply those lessons from our past to the situations that we're in today. Welcome, come on in. You're fine, don't worry. So as we look to these situations in the past, there's sort of 3 themes that we're going to be pulling out of these. One is that sometimes the challenges that our ancestors faced brought out collaborative work, where they faced the challenge head on, they communicated clearly, they came together, and they collaborated to make a decision. Sometimes we're going to be looking at how individual towns acted decisively for their own interest and created waves that impacted their neighbors in other towns in the community. And other times we're going to be looking at how people were influenced by fear and hyperbole to be able to, or actually prevented them from making informed, critical decisions in the moment. After we look at the vignettes, Susanne and Noel are going to join us to talk a little bit about the MDI Housing Solutions Initiative that's taking place now. We're going to take this information related to our housing past and apply it to our housing present and future. So come on in. So I understand that the housing conversation right now on MDI is very contentious. There are so many places where this debate is playing out online, on social media, on regular media, in town meetings, but that is not what's going to happen tonight. Tonight, we are here as neighbors, and we are here to listen to each other and to listen to our past and learn and think critically about how we want to move together in the future. Okay, so I just want to set that tone a little bit because I also believe that history has the ability to take the temperature down a little bit as we think critically. So with that, I will dig in, I think. Okay.
Not moving.
It's not moving, there we go, I'll figure it out. Okay, so the presentation this evening was inspired by an article that was produced in our latest edition of Chebacco, which is the journal that the MDI Historical Society publishes every year. It comes out in May. There's always 12 new articles of scholarship written by volunteer authors. And so this year we have MDI Inspired, which was the theme for this edition. And as one of those articles, Eliza Warrick wrote the influence of the seasonal economy on MDI's year-round housing patterns. Eliza was not able to be with us in person this evening, but she is online, and her incredible in-depth research is the basis for the housing material that we'll talk about later. So that's where we're going to get started, or that's where we're going to finish, excuse me, is with Chebacco's work. But we're going to get started looking at a few historic lessons. And the first is logging. And I just want to call attention to our resident logging and mill expert, Therese Miller, who's in the back. So she'll correct me if I get anything wrong on this. And before I dig into lesson number one, it takes maybe a minute to define some of the terms that I'm going to be using this evening. And the first is the difference between a resident, a summer resident, and a summer person. These are terms we all use interchangeably. But a resident is someone who lives here as their primary address, who votes here, and who pays their taxes here. Summer residents is a misleading term in that the summer residents don't vote here, and while they pay property tax, they don't pay other forms of taxes. This is not their primary home. However, summer residents can be distinguished by having oftentimes multi-generational, long, very committed ties passionately to this island and its future, invest in its success and who we are. So they're a really key part of who we are, but that difference between a year-round resident in terms of a voting, tax-paying member and a summer resident is key to understanding some of the debates that we've had in the past and to some of the situations going on today. All of these different categories have different motivations for what inspires them. So for example, as we dig into some of the different vignettes, it may feel like we are pitting year-round residents versus summer residents, or summer residents versus summer people, or versus tourism. And on the surface, and sometimes for generalization, that may bear out in some of these conversations. But I want to be super clear right now, that is not the intent, because the debates are not about summer versus year-round. They're really based in values. So what do we value? Do you value this place as a location where you need to earn your livelihood? Do you value this place as a retreat where you come to have spiritual renewal? Both of those things, all of those things, there's so many different variables. So just like it's not an argument versus summer versus year-round residents, our values are not black and white either. But all those values play into how we make decisions together collectively. So with those little caveats in mind, I'll dig into lesson number one. So we know that Wabanaki people who were coming here for 13,000 years prior to European contact did land management. They were clearing fields, logging, burning to keep open land available for deer and moose to be able to encourage hunting, also for burning blueberry fields to increase yields. But with the first European settlers coming in, we saw much more intense land management and also land clearing. Obviously, MDI is an island. And so before there was a bridge, all of our settlement patterns are happening around the edge of the island. And so those first initial towns and those first initial logging efforts start taking place around the edge of MDI. Land is being cleared for small farms. They had extensive populations of sheep that were here, cows, other small domestic animals that you would need to be able to survive before we had other sources of provisioning. By 1794, we know that we had 11 sawmills located around the perimeter of the island. Most of the locations are outlets for streams, but that number grew as the population grew. And the sawmills were here for not just milling timber into like boards for houses or barns, but also for shingles, for staves. There were lathe mills for refining timber products. Trees were cut in the woods and brought by horse or oxen to the mills for processing. And then those products were shipped to markets either locally or outside of Maine. And this was vital to the economic survival of people here on MDI. Sorry. In her guidebook, Mount Desert on the Coast of Maine in 1874, Clara Barnes Martin wrote, quote, "Except in one or two almost inaccessible valleys, the forest primeval is almost gone. But huge stumps and scathed trunks show what the axe and the fire have done." Other publications offered similar criticism to the logging habits of MDI, accusing the locals of economic interest over concern for the environment. Quote, "The poverty and greed of the inhabitants has sacrificed every tree that was worth the labor of falling. Locals relied on the income offered by the natural resources, not only from the timber, but also from the sea and from quarries." And this economic need was oftentimes overlooked by summer visitors who believed that the island's economy was sustained by their dollars alone. The invention of the portable sawmill around 1881 changed this even further. So instead of going into the forest and having to take select trees to the mills, now the saws came to the trees and massive clear cutting was possible. So trees that had been too large to cut and haul out of the forest now could be cut in place, milled in place, and then the timber taken to the coast to either be used here locally or shipped as part of our economic systems here. And this had a devastating impact on the environment of MDI. People started taking notice. I already mentioned that there was criticism being published in guidebooks and in different correspondence, but there was also an important group of summer visitors who were here between 1880 and 1890, a group of students from Harvard known as the Champlain Society. They were all over the island taking observations of natural resources and natural phenomena and recording birds and plants and climate and all sorts of different activities over the course of 10 summers. And they kept really detailed logbooks. And as they were out hiking, they started to notice the damage being caused by all this logging was not just in the areas of settlement, but also becoming more extensive along the hikes and the lakes and the rivers here. So a hiking trail might have a tree-lined corridor so that if you hiked the trail, you had the image of walking in the forest. But were you to get off the trail in any capacity, you would find that the environment had been logged. So this group of students really started to become concerned about that. The founder of the Champlain Society, Charles Eliot the Younger, was Charles Eliot's son, noted for founding Acadian National Park. So Charles Eliot the Younger and his friends were concerned about this destruction, and they make note of it in their notebooks in several different ways. First here, this is by E.L. Rand, one of the Champlain Society members in 1880, who points out that the increasing popularity of the island means prosperity to the inhabitants, but destruction of many of nature's chiefest charms. The woods are falling beneath the axe, the rare wildflowers are disappearing, the ferns and mosses torn from the spots they've so long adorned. Shy birds of the wood and every year are being driven further and further into the recesses of the island. The lakes and streams are being depopulated by unscrupulous fishermen. The animals are either being driven away or destroyed. In such a state of things, it will not be many years before all the wilderness of MDI is gone forever. So this sets the stage for a debate about who has the authority to determine the fate of the island. And when the island is a haven for summer elite, or was the island a home for year-round fishermen and farmers? Of course, it's both, and it's more. The lines are never that clear, but the duality of the debate was clear. Year-round residents required year-round stable income to live on MDI, and lumber was big business. They needed cleared lands for farm and for dairies. They needed lumber products to fish, to be able to smoke fish, for heat, and for shipping. They also wanted to have access to the markets in Boston, New York, and the West Indies at the time. Summer residents were coming in increasing numbers, seeking a retreat from pollution and industrialization, and were distressed to see that those influences were happening here on MDI. They chose MDI specifically over Newport for the natural beauty of the island and the opportunities to explore nature. So how could you reconcile these two competing interests? The Champlain Society found inspiration, asking, is it possible to protect the natural beauty of the island in any way? A company of interested parties could buy at a small cost the parts of the island less desirable for building. They could add from time to time such of the more desirable lots as they could obtain control either by purchase or arrangement with the proprietor. This tract of land should then be placed in the charge of a forester or his assistants. The lakes and streams should be stocked with fish, the increase of animals and birds encouraged, the growth of trees, shrubs, plants, ferns, and mosses cared for. This park should be free for all. That was E.L. Rand, the Champlain Society in 1881. Charles Eliot and E.L. Rand recorded all of their concerns and observations in these logbooks that are now part of the collection of the MDI Historical Society and have been digitized. So you can read them online if you're interested. But their exploration of MDI and natural history was a gentleman's hobby. It was not their careers. And so as they graduated from school, they went on and did other things in their lives and had a different career. Charles Eliot became a landscape architect working with Frederick Olmsted. He was inspired by the nature of public access to parks in Europe, and he wanted to take that model with Olmsted and bring it to America. And so we see their work in Central Park in New York City and Boston's Emerald Necklace chain, in addition to other parks, really promoting that public access of nature. But Charles Eliot continued to speculate how he could bring that same value to preservation on MDI. And here in 1890, he continues to speculate, can nothing be done to preserve for the use and enjoyment of the great unorganized body of the common people, some fine parts, at least, of this seaside wilderness of Maine? Unfortunately, Charles Eliot the Younger died at age 37, unable to realize this goal, and his father, in processing his papers, finds not only his own remarks, but the remarks of the other members of the Champlain Society, inspired to make change. And so he and George Dorr get together, they form the Hancock County Trustees of Public Reservation, which is a story we're all very familiar with in the foundation of Acadia National Park. But they didn't act alone. They had a wide support network from summer and year-round residents. Some recognized the beauty of the land and the seascapes, and they wanted to protect that. Some saw tourism and summer visitation as a new economic opportunity, and others were collaborative, linking existing trails that were being managed by village improvement societies with the new park, creating a network of local and national preservation lands. Vignette number 1. So what do we think the lessons learned from this example might be? I've been a teacher in museums and I can wait.
Collaboration.
Yeah. Collaboration. Yes, definitely one of the main lessons. If you're on the internet and online, Kate will share if you type anything on here. Any other lessons other than collaboration, collaborative network, or relationships? Listening to young people. Yeah, great.
I'm thinking that's all good two shoes, but there were people who objected to the national park coming here, and so you got to factor that in. How were they brought around, either to support it or just get out and vote?
Yeah, so there was dissent about the national park for sure, but this collaboration of being able to look beyond that to the larger, better good is what actually ends up winning the day. And so in my mind, the lesson learned that we can apply to some of the conversations we're having today is that compromise and a shared understanding led to a common solution. And so while not everyone agreed that, of course, that's not possible, the preservation of public land and respecting the needs for residents to still be able to continue to rely on their own land to provide their own livelihood created a balance in this situation that was able to address multiple needs through the solution of land preservation. All right, next. the Auto Wars. We're gonna jump ahead a little bit of time. So we don't know the exact date, but sometime before 1900, the first car drove on to MDI, because very soon afterwards, we have the first law regulating those cars on MDI, and that we have on the books. So in all my research of the Auto Wars and looking through this, we couldn't really find in the newspapers. You would think there might have been something about the first car, and maybe there is, but we couldn't find it. But we did find that there's a promotional flyer published in 1900 that promotes MDI as the perfect place to take your car to go touring, because the roads are beautifully maintained and hilly, and the vistas are gorgeous. Almost immediately, the local paper says, hold up, the hills are too narrow and it's too steep. You can't bring a car here. So we set the stage for debate very early in the Auto Wars. Regardless of when the first car drove on the island, the first laws to manage them were fascinating. One, you had to put an advertisement in the local paper prior to driving your car, announcing your route and the time you were going to take it. Number two, within the town of Eden, Bar Harbor, or the township of Eden, it was illegal to operate an automobile on the streets between the hours of 10 a.m. and 10 p.m. And your speed limit was not to exceed 5 miles an hour. And on MDI, if you saw a horse while you were driving your car or any other type of livestock, you were mandated to stop the car, pull over, turn off the engine, and wait for the animal to move on so you wouldn't spook it. It was assumed that MDI would be a prime market for automobiles. There was actually a manufacturing plant for steam cars located on West Street in Bar Harbor starting in 1901. We know that the owners of the Boston Automobile Company built it here because they assumed that summer residents who had cars in their primary residence would want an island car. And they would come up here and they would want to buy a little car to be able to drive those hilly, narrow, beautiful roads of the island. And they also had a skilled year-round labor force that they knew would be available to build these cars, and a deep water shipping port to be able to ship them all over the world. And we do know that cars shipped out of Bar Harbor to South Africa, India, and England over the 2 years that the steam company was in operation. However, the assumptions were wrong. Summer residents did not, generally speaking, want to come here and drive cars. This seawall. So this is a little later. This is 1919, but I just thought the picture is awesome and we needed to look at it. So by the time we, the sort of the end of the Boston Automobile Company's era in Bar Harbor, around 1902, 1903, we start to see the first laws banning automobiles on MDI. The state of Maine had passed a local ordinance so that each town could vote whether to allow cars or not within the territory of its town. And so immediately, Eden and Mount Desert voted to ban automobiles, and Tremont, which at the time included the village of Southwest Harbor, voted to allow cars. So think about a map of the island. It's not particularly easy to get to this side without passing through Mount Desert or Bar Harbor. And so it made this really complicated web of access and sort of understanding of where you could and couldn't drive a car. And there actually was a road on the western side of the island that was not apparently very good that cars could drive to be able to access Tremont and then around the Horn to Southwest Harbor. But a lot of people broke the law and drove through the village of Soamesville anyway. So it didn't take long for a debate to start breaking out between anti-cars and pro-cars, especially if you think of the map of the island. We have a quote from Dr. Robert Abbey, who said he believed they're, quote, a piece disturbing modern innovation that bring a poor quality of transient visitor. Ernest Grobe believed that it would, quote, ruin the hotel business in Bar Harbor, same as it has done all over, and it would kill the town in a few years. And Miss Susan A. Robbins agreed, stating, Bar Harbor, I believe, is the only place in America, possibly the only place in the world, where automobiles cannot come. But year-round residents wanted the economic opportunities offered by cars. They wanted to be able to open gas stations, garages, service stations, service chauffeurs. Sim Mayo, pictured here in Southwest Harbor, opened a large garage and gas station. And summer residents, ironically enough, brought their cars to MDI. They just didn't want to drive them on the island. They housed them in Southwest Harbor and Tremont, and then would get their chauffeurs to drive them off the island so that they could go touring on the mainland. And so Sim was able to open his garage catering to those, but he wanted to be able to open that experience up to more people on the island. Doctors were arguing that it was a public safety hazard not to be able to drive an automobile. They needed to get to their patients more quickly. And in fact, Dr. Phillips drove his car through the village of Soamesville with the intent explicitly to be arrested so that he could challenge the ban in state Supreme Court, saying, I need to be able to access my patients faster for public safety. The Supreme Court said, yes, we understand and we agree with you. However, the ban remains because the roads on MTI are too hilly and narrow for cars. So interesting that about 5 years after that statement is made in the papers in 1900, it is repeated by the state Supreme Court in Dr. Phillips' case. And so they said that more likely the cars would be more of a public health risk than getting to your patients faster. So not only did we want to have economic opportunities and public safety opportunities, year-round residents wanted the status that came with owning a car at the time too. But summer residents had seen firsthand the noise and the pollution, the damage, the risk, the health issues, and the cultural shift that automobiles have brought to the cities. And they were resistant to see the same kind of changes happen here on MDI. J.D. Rockefeller Jr. was famous for saying he wanted one place in the world where he didn't have to smell his own gasoline. In addition to resisting cars, summer residents pushed back against electricity. So the town of Mount Desert actually was trying to ban electric extensions into Northeast Harbor and Seal Harbor. And an electric trolley that was designed from Bar Harbor to Northeast Harbor was also banned. They were trying to keep MDI rustic and free from these modern influences. Now remember, summer residents can't vote, and these are local ordinances. So how is it that Bar Harbor and Mount Desert are constantly voting against automobiles if year-round residents want them? Fear and hyperbole. Newspapers were filled with stories about car accidents, children getting run over, all sorts of like deadly things. They're like happening in other parts of the world. When you do this research, you're like, oh, here's a car accident. Wait, in Colorado, like who cares? But it's published here because they're trying to promote this fear that these automobiles are so dangerous. And so you see this debate play out in these sort of two different phases. In the winter, when it's primarily year-round residents present, the debate comes out in favor of automobiles. But when summer residents arrive, the debate switches. And now all of a sudden they're anti-automobiles. And so the sort of common fear tactics, this is fascinating. This postcard, it says toot and be darned. And so here's a little motor car with these young people looking to go fast. And this old guy with his horse and buggy is blocking their way. And they're obviously honking at him. And he says toot and be darned. So this was a national postcard you can find sort of anywhere. But here on MDI, someone mounted it to this piece of cardboard and says, an object lesson for automobile enthusiasts on Mount Desert Island. This is bad enough, but what would happen if the team were going in the opposite direction, right? Terrifying. And if that wasn't scary enough, if automobiles are admitted, the taxpayers must widen the roads. Fear tactics, in addition to these types, were often referring to cars as devil carts. And they're going to cause ructions and run over kids and chickens. Why those are equitable in compliance of anti-automobile fuel, I'm not sure, but they're always paired together. And they're a danger to life and limb. They also are going to bring economic instability because their taxes will increase, businesses will decline, and people will lose jobs. The sustainability of the summer economic reliability for most of the for especially Mount Desert and Bar Harbor, would be called into question because summer residents are going to leave. They're going to seek alternative destinations like Niagara Falls or go to Europe. And the environment is going to be ruined. In 2022, we published an article that was written in 1909, but published, like written as though it were in 1925, about like this man's sort of post-apocalyptic vision for Bar Harbor and MDI if automobiles were allowed. I would encourage you to go back and read it because it's fascinating what he kind of predicts will happen to MDI if cars are allowed on the island, which is all filled with pollution and people dying everywhere. And so during open elections where a resident had to raise their hand, are you for or against the automobile? The results generally favored summer residents. In ballot elections where your vote was private, votes generally went in favor of allowing for the automobile because those people who were reliant on summer residents for their income could not openly vote against their own best interests. So we have some really interesting quotes. Charles Eliot ends up writing to another summer resident, Bishop Lawrence, saying, "Summer residents, whether owners of cottages, leases, or hotel guests, are by an absolute overwhelming majority opposed to the introduction of automobiles." And Bishop Lawrence replies, "If a majority of Bar Harbor people think it is wise and profitable to shut out automobiles, well and good. But if a majority want to admit automobiles, is it fair or right to those of us who are here 10 or 12 weeks to try and so influence this legislation as to prevent it? Why? Because we want quiet roads in the summer. Should the citizens of Bar Harbor and their friends and tradespeople on the mainland be deprived all year round of the use of a vehicle upon which many of us depend our pleasure in the conduct of business?" The debate frustrated local residents who, as I mentioned with Dr. Phillips, purposely start breaking the law. This is Tim Mayo, who had his garage here in town. He announced that he was going to drive through the village of Soamesville and into Bar Harbor. So the residents of Soamesville kind of get panicky and they put a big blockade up, and he drives through the blockade. It's very dramatic. And he pulls into Bar Harbor and he waits to be arrested. He is. And he challenges the ban in the state Supreme Court, saying that his economic opportunities are being limited and his constitutional rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are not, he's not able to fulfill those because of this ban. But the court disagreed and the ban held. We have another example of a gentleman on his honeymoon from Boston named Fordham Mahoney, who in 1907 is driving with his wife and his bride in an Oldsmobile up the coast of Maine, which became more typical as the automobile became more accessible. People were, instead of being sort of beholden to the schedules of trains and ferries, knew that they could now go on their own schedule and have access to kind of anywhere they wanted along the coast of Maine. So they extended these vacations all up and down the coast before arriving ultimately on MDI for the rest of their summer destination. So Fordham and his bride are trying to do this, and they get to Camden and they learn that they cannot drive their car into Bar Harbor, which is where they're going to be spending the rest of their honeymoon at the Malvern. And so this Camden resident says, well, if you're going to take that devil cart into Bar Harbor, I have a solution. Hitch a horse to the front of the car and pull it into Bar Harbor. And that's what they do. So Fordham hitches the horse to the front of his Oldsmobile and he tries to pull it into Bar Harbor, but he stalls out going up a hill. He can't pull his heavy car. So the chauffeur has to turn on the car to get to the crest of the hill. Fordham and his bride arrive at the Malvern and are arrested. He has to go to state Supreme Court. They test the constitutionality of the ban. He loses and he has to pay the court fees. So tensions start to get really, really tense. We hear these start to play out more and more pro-car rhetoric in the newspapers, and also at town meetings and during family dinners. Quote, "There's no reason why the aristocracy of Bar Harbor should have any special privilege or immunity. The use of motor vehicles upon the highways of Mount Desert Island is well within the purpose of the dedication of the highways, and to exclude them at the whim of a few people who really do not belong here but are foreign residents would seem the height of absurdity." He did not sign his name to that. That was anonymous. But Elliot Benson, a Bar Harbor attorney, remarked that a very large class of resident people of Bar Harbor are tired of being told what we must do. We are not impressed with the argument to the extent that we want this place to gradually sink into a quiet retreat for millionaires and their particular friends. We welcome them and anyone who wishes to come, but it should be understood that the town of Eden and Mount Desert must remain open to everyone who wishes to visit our shores. The issue became even more complicated because there were so many businesses that relied on not having automobiles, such as this livery pictured here in Northeast Harbor. And there was a large number of people drawn to MDI specifically because of the ban of automobiles. So between 1903 and 1909, this local ordinance kept coming down the same. Mount Desert, Eden, anti-cars, Tremont, Southwest Harbor, pro. But by 1909, automobile touring had become so popular that Bar Harbor was actually starting to lose money as a result of the ban. Hotels all along the southern coast actually banded together and wrote letters to hotel owners in Bar Harbor and said, please, you have to lift this ban because it's affecting all of us. People are now going to Niagara and Newport, God forbid, and Europe and Canada because they can't bring their cars to Bar Harbor and they want to be able to drive. And so finally, that ends up being that economic impetus that changes the nature of Bar Harbor's ban. And Northeast Harbor, well, Mount Desert continues to enforce their ban after it falls in 1909 in Bar Harbor because they had been writing contracts for renting houses to summer residents, stipulating that there would be no automobiles on NDI. This debate rages a little bit longer, and finally the state legislature says, enough. This is no longer a local ordinance question. Cars are allowed everywhere in Maine. Done. And that happens in 1915. The town of Mount Desert petitions the legislature and says, we already have all these contracts signed with people for the summer of 1915 that says that they won't have to have automobiles, and the state says, we don't care. Like, ban is lifted, cars are here. 1916 was the first full summer season that automobiles were allowed on NDI. It was also the first season that Sur de Mont opened as a national monument, and it saw 16,000 automobiles that first summer. Overwhelming from the beginning. So, lesson learned in automobiles, on the auto wars. What lessons can we pull?
You're worried about AI taking over and being a problem. It's the recent success of the NVIDIA stack tells us probably what's going to happen.
Yeah. It was.
Just have to, we have to some extent, surrender to the technologies that evolve, but find ways to live with them and find ways to balance, as you say, these different interests.
So we have to understand and embrace technology and change and understand that there have to be ways to balance living with it. Yeah.
When was the Trenton Bridge?
The first bridge was built in 1836 as a toll bridge, and then there's been successive bridges ever since. Yeah. Any other lessons that we pull out from the auto wars? Yeah.
And just on it's an economic consideration, is that came forefront in this.
Yeah, the economic influences that at one point we think are swaying one way, but actually end up completely going in the opposite direction in this situation. Yeah, so that's exactly right, is that there's a couple of lessons. One is that individual towns made decisions that they felt were best for their town, and it pushed the impact to other towns on the island because we're still 108 square miles. And so it's all connected. And so we see that impact that one town can have on our other towns within the island. And then we also can see that in lack of a decision being made locally means that somebody else will come in and make that decision for you. And in this case, it was the state. Okay, last lesson. KKK. So right, we just did a big jump. So it may be a surprise to you that Maine had the largest membership of the Ku Klux Klan outside of the South during the 1920s. The rise and the fall of the Klan in Maine had less to do with violent acts perpetrated against Blacks and African Americans and much more to do with anti-immigration fear. And so the KKK was building on a legacy from the Know Nothing Party of the 1840s that had a very strong anti-Catholic, anti-immigration perspective. The Klan's message during this window of time was pro-white, pro-Protestant superiority, and it resonated with many Mainers, especially here on NDI. A dynamic leader named Eugene Farnsworth was the driving force behind the popularity of the Klan in Maine initially. In 1920, there were virtually no members of the KKK in the state of Maine. In 1925, 28% of the state's population were members of the KKK. Huge rise. The period of the Klan's activity, especially in the, yes.
What was the Black migration
Were there any black people in Maine?
Maine, so the question was if there were black people in Maine in the 1920s, and certainly in southern Maine more, but Maine was a sunset town or a sunset state. So you had to, if you were black, you had to be out of Maine by sunset. We didn't have any African-American hotels or places where people could stay. Like there's the Green Book. We actually have an article about this in a previous Chebacco as well. Related to African-American settlement. There was an attempt at making an African-American resort in Sorrento that ultimately ends up failing in large part because it's very hard for people to move through the state of Maine to be able to get to an enclave that was safe because it was so distant from Maine's other borders. So the KKK activity here was very focused on Catholics, immigration, and Jews. And part of the reason is that the KKK really in this window, I have a whole other talk I can do about the KKK, but in this second phase of the Klan, we have a lot of Europeans fleeing post-World War I Europe and coming over to America. And so they're bringing with them their language, their religion, their foods. And so that is inciting fear. And you see the same kind of rhetoric played out over and over again. And I know it's maybe a little bit hard to see, but if you look at the Klan in 1924, they say they are for better schools, clean politics, they're for law enforcement, restricted immigration, greater alliance to the flag, back to the Constitution. Sound familiar?
Yeah.
Right? Like it's all the same stuff. So this is what they're saying. And Eugene Farnsworth was brilliant because he would bring local religious and community civic leaders with him to speak. And he gave an address in Bar Harbor. Actually, he was on the island many times. 600 people attended his rally in Bar Harbor to hear him speak with local civic leaders. And he does not talk about all the things the Klan is against. It's all what we're for. We're for Protestants. We're not against Catholics, but we just want them over there. And so this divisiveness felt safe to Mainers because we had this huge influx of French Canadian Catholics coming down to work in the mills. And so that was feeling very threatening. And so the language of the Klan felt safe, and the imagery of the iconic cape, burning crosses of the Klan felt like the legacy of fraternal organizations like Masons and other people who had these sort of rights. This didn't seem that different to them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did they threaten, how did they threaten the French Canadians, the immigrants, the Catholics?
So we have examples of threats happening to immigrants and Catholics. We have a situation not related to the Klan, but setting the stage for the Klan, of a priest in Ellsworth being tarred and feathered. And then a church in Bath, a Catholic church in Bath being burned. But during this phase of the Klan, they're almost exclusively focused on politics. So they're trying to get Klan sympathizing people into office and kick out. We have examples in Maine of Catholics and Jews being kicked off school boards and kicked off selectmen as selectmen. And then eventually in 1925, Governor Brewster is the Klan candidate and he wins the governorship. And that's sort of their greatest victory. And so this focus on elections is really where the Klan's energy was here in Maine. They were so prevalent in Maine. The first daytime parade of the KKK was here in Maine in Milo. And the Klan believed in supporting restrictive immigration laws, the use of the King James Bible in schools, instruction in English, and electing representatives at all levels. Birth of the Nation was shown in Bar Harbor at the Star Theater. And we know that because of the prevalence of Catholic and Jewish populations in Bar Harbor, most Klan membership was in Northeast Harbor and Southwest Harbor. There were several big meetings, as I pointed out, in Bar Harbor, but there also were quite a few located in other parts of the island. As I said, 600 people attended the one in Bar Harbor, and a report in the Bar Harbor Times stated that, quote, "We will have our share of joiners, and the Klan's appeal to racial prejudice and hatred will attract a following." But Farnsworth was notably restrained at this meeting. According to the report, Farnsworth was careful in his choice of language and generally refrained from his abuse of our citizens of the Roman Catholic faith, as has been a feature of his former talks. Taken as a whole, there's little to object to. Part of Farnsworth effectiveness, as I said, was to be able to partner with these local businesses that help, or business leaders and religious leaders, and it helped foster trust. So he was trusted because people that you trusted from your community supported him and stood with him. In celebration of Governor Brewster's victory in 1925, the Klan hosted a Klan, K-L-A-N, bake in Trenton with 5,000 people in attendance and burning crosses. I couldn't find any photographs of cross burnings on MDI, so this is just a general one, but we also know that there was one on the lawn of Neighborhood House, December in 1925, because the newspaper reports, the moon shines brightly, almost full. The sounds of hymns sung by a large and orderly crowd on the lawn of Neighborhood House can be heard drifting through town on the night air. Prayers are offered, firelight dances on the window panes, a fiery cross burns on the lawn, illuminating the dark. It seems fitting to give the last words on the rise and fall of the Klan to an MDI resident with firsthand knowledge for this, who is Ray Foster, who was a local plasterer and contractor, who gave this oral history to Bob Pyle in 1974. Quote, "The Ku Klux Klan was active in 1928, and a lot of us joined, thinking it was kind of like a cross between the Masons and the Boy Scouts. We liked the encampments. It wasn't long before we were told we had to hate Black people. We weren't excited by that, but there weren't many Blacks around MDI, so it didn't take much of a practical difference. Besides, society was different then. Next, we were told we had to hate the Jews. Guys started to get uncomfortable then. There weren't many Jews around, but there were people like Dan Rosenthal, a peddler who came in the summer. Everybody liked Dan. He was a good man. Then we were told we had to hate Catholics. Well, that did it. There were a lot of Catholics around. We knew damn well that they were good people. A Catholic priest in Northeast, Father Kinney, was active in the fire company, for example. There was a Catholic church on Lookout Way in Northeast Harbor. The Catholic church had just bought one of the old school local houses on Summit Road and was renovating it for a rectory. The Catholic church was enlarging the little story into a large 3-story rectory. When all the workmen in Northeast Harbor donated at least a day's work on that rectory, and we signed our work. That was our message to the Ku Klux Klan from every damn one of us. You'll find our signatures all over that house." And that was the end of the KKK. Lessons learned. Yeah.
Yeah, the KKK came in right after World War I, when there was a lot of changes going on. You had a lot of unemployed veterans. My grandfather was in World War I. He lived in Westbrook, and a local Klan leader came up to him and said, "Ted, we need to get more members in the Klan." And you've already had pretty much most of the people in town, obviously police, town, and a lot of the town people in the upper end of the spectrum. He said, "I'll give you $5 for every new member you can get me." Well, my grandfather was Catholic and said, "Well, I'm Catholic." It doesn't matter. Every member you get. And there wasn't many Blacks. In the 1950s, my grandfather worked at railroad. So they would drive me down to Union Station in Portland, where I grew up. And I knew you could count every one of them on one hand. They were porters and magazines. So it was a Catholic. They really didn't like Catholics. They didn't like
That story has played out in my research in other parts of the state as well, to be able that there was an encouragement of pay to be recruiting. Yeah. So the lessons that I took from this are really focused on fear and hyperbole. They really can override critical thinking and respectful conversation. So now, the reason we're here, right? How does housing fit into this history? So MDI has been a summer destination for almost 200 years, but our history is more than a summer resort. The towns of Mount Desert Island each have their own culture. Southwestern Fremont relied on fishing and had large canneries employing hundreds of people, closing in the 1980s. Each town had multiple grocery stores, shoe stores, clothing stores, furniture stores, movie theaters. Almost anything a person could need could be purchased in town. While Bar Harbor and Northeast Harbor and Seal Harbor saw increasing economic opportunities and influence from summer visitors, there was still robust year-round communities living in those towns. As the population on the island grew, houses were built to house people and services were provided by local business owners. To understand the current crisis, it might be helpful at some point to look and figure out when the culture changed from a common understanding that growth in people meant growth in infrastructure. There are several examples from our history that point to this relationship between population growth and construction. Prior to the automobile, visitors to MDI had to arrive by steamship, often taking trains to be able to get here and then the ship into Bar Harbor. Development was primarily located along MDI's waterfront and immediate areas. Locals lived close to the water because this was their primary source for access to the larger world. Improvements in transportation and roads allowed people to move further inland from the coast. With the opening of the Trenton Bridge in 1836, access to the island became easier and people could come and go on their own schedule. To support the influx of people, new jobs were created and the year-round population of the island saw periods of growth. So this is based on research done by Eliza Warrick. Again, she's online. I'm super grateful for the research that she did for her article. And if you haven't had a chance to read it, I would encourage you to do so. I have a few copies here for purchase. But based on the census data between 1920 and 1930, Bar Harbor grew almost 900 residents, which is a 23% increase in 10 years. While the town of Mount Desert saw a 35% increase in that same period of time. Quote, clusters of single-family homes were springing up in villages, like the neighborhood across from Connors Emerson in Bar Harbor. In Northeast Harbor, housing was built to accommodate that 35% growth in an area known as Sylvan City, where most of the houses in this neighborhood were constructed in the 1920s. Anticipating more growth, there was actually quite a large subdivision planned with 26 lots. Maps were made, deed restrictions were in place, and all of it was planned out, but the Depression came in and actually sort of sidelined that project. But people were also moving to the quiet side as well. In Southwest Harbor, nearly 40% of the housing stock that we have in town today was built by 1940. The fire of 1947 had a devastating impact on housing. MDI lost 67 summer homes and 170 year-round homes and 5 hotels. The island, including summer people, pulled together with donations of money and land for rebuilding. We know this was also a period of large growth for the park, but this was also a period of common understanding that infrastructure for year-round locals had to happen as well. Bar Harbor constructed 13% of its current housing stock between 1940 and 1959, and trailers were brought in, was the very first prefab housing that they think happened on the island during this window of time as well. In Mount Desert, 140 new homes were built between 1950 and 1959. So what happened? How do we go from building based on community need to a critical lack of housing, let alone affordable housing? There isn't really a lot of land on MDI that can be developed. This great map from College of the Atlantic shows buildable land. So not only have we large areas of the island that are not available to build on because the terrain is not suitable, we also have large areas of protected land. And so the general need of people to be able to build is narrowed significantly over time since the 1947 fire. And then we also see multi-generational ownership. So you have people who want to stay here, who have a home, but then their successive generations also need additional homes. And so we don't see turnover of homes as often to accommodate growing populations. So Bar Harbor's Gilded Age around 1800, we see the growth of hotels in every town on the island. And this made a predictability of visitation. You knew how many beds could be filled at any given time. So town managers knew the impact on their communities. They knew how many parking spaces, how many restaurant seats, who was going to be in the town at any given time. So that's changed now with the influx of seasonal rentals, where we don't have an idea of how many people, how many parking spaces, how many restaurants we need to be able to accommodate the people in our communities. The equation has changed. Now we can only guess at what we can be expecting. When people stayed at hotels, they went out to eat. Now at Airbnbs, they're cooking at home. We see shortages in our grocery stores. We also see infrastructure problems with houses that were built to accommodate 4 people are now taking seasonal rentals of 8 and 10, which is our septic and sewer systems are not, our infrastructure was not built to be able to accommodate that. So houses built for a single family are now taking more people. Water and septic, as I said, aren't in line with those uses and demands. So Susanne will have some great specific examples that we're going to show. But we're going to just look at Southwest Harbor really quick to look at the fact that based on Suzanne's research, 26% of the houses in Southwest Harbor are seasonal rentals. And so you start to take that and you start to multiply it and understand when we talk about the growth, housing and the growth of people, they're not lined up. Scarcity means a competition for limited resources, and this drives up prices, as we can see. So we're starting to also see a shift in island culture that comes with this as well. So where once year-round community was the norm and expected, what we've started to hear more and more is that you shouldn't expect to be able to live and work on MDI year-round. This has become a more common frame that I know both of us have heard, all three of us have heard. The concept that MDI is exclusive is new, but it's becoming more prevalent. And it's a notable change from our history when we had and valued thriving year-round communities. So the lessons that I think that we can apply to this history are that island-wide decisions require holistic approaches to communication and problem solving, respecting that people have different opinions and values. The decisions that one town can create, for the decisions from one town can create waves that impact all other towns, and faced with indecision and inconsistency, outside forces will make the decisions for us. And fear and hyperbole mean that critical thinking, when it's required to make informed decisions, goes out the window. It's easy to create a false sense of fear and urgency, which causes people to act against their own best interests sometimes. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Susanne. Sorry, this is very sloppy. We're going to talk a little bit about how to apply these lessons today.
Thank you.
Yeah. You can just sit down.
I got a meeting. Let's get on here. Thank you.
Okay, can you hear me okay? Thanks, Raney. That's a tough act to follow. So much interesting information just shared with us. So I'm Susanne Paul. I work with the Musson group with Noel Musson, just across the street behind here. And the next thing we're going to talk about is sort of the follow-up to what Raney just introduced, so what are we were joking when we were preparing for this, that this is sort of like the fourth case study, right? So now we've talked about these other sort of complicated events in history in the island, and now we're sort of like in the middle of this fourth one, let's say, and we don't know what the outcome is yet, right? So what are we doing about it? This graph from the Maine Housing, they have an affordability index online. I encourage people to check it out if you like numbers. So this is the affordability index that goes from 2000 to 2003. And what it's showing is a relative increases in income and home prices for the 4 towns on the island. And what you can see is I know it's probably hard for folks in the back, and the darker line is the percent change in median home prices since 2000. And the orangey yellow line is the change in median incomes since 2000. And you can see that there's obviously been fluctuation in the past where they've diverged a little bit, but around 2000, there's this sort of dramatic divergence, right? That's kind of the time when the interest rates dropped during the pandemic and people were moving and people were buying more homes too. So the Musson Group, we're in this interesting position because we work with a variety of organizations and institutions and individuals here on the island. And increasingly over the last few years, we were hearing more and more conversations about housing woes. So area businesses struggling to attract and retain a workforce, year-round workers commuting from farther and farther afield, and people moving here for jobs who don't necessarily qualify for Island Housing Trust programs. We have Marla here tonight, who we work closely with. But those people are shut out of the housing market, for example. So everyone was talking about and trying to tackle this issue, but really on their own. And I should say too, like institutions on the island are trying to, they're trying to solve the problem on their own to sort of stay afloat. This is just another data table that kind of partially illustrates the situation here in the island. So this again is from Maine Housing and their affordability index. And what you can see is the 4 towns on the left column. The index is anything below 1 is considered unaffordable. So the lower the number, the less affordable it is. The median home price is in the next column. So for Bar Harbor 2003, they report the median home price is $625,000. But the median income is reported as $82,000 essentially. So the home price affordable to that median income is $244,951. So you can see there's this huge gap, right? And then comparing the incomes too, I think is really interesting. And then this last column says households unable to afford the median home in 2023. So that's 93.5%. So these are just interesting numbers to look at that, you know, partially paint a picture of what is going on. And as this graph shows, I mean, it is sort of, it was very steep in here, maybe it's turning a little bit, but it seems to be continuing. So we felt like we were in this kind of interesting position as a somewhat neutral party. We're not a town government. We're not a mission-driven organization. We're working with all these different groups on the island, and we felt we were in a position to convene and facilitate a larger conversation about housing on the island and towns off the island as well. So in 2023, we convened the MDI Housing Solutions Summit, and then again in March 2024 as a way to bring together a wide cross-section of businesses, institutional leaders, community leaders to have a highly structured and productive conversation about housing and what is going on. And in 2023, the summit was an all-day workshop with participants who were intentionally divided into groups where like people who don't normally talk to each other were put together so they could kind of hear each other's perspectives. And they were asked to think up the what are the needs that you perceive on the island? What are the barriers to meeting those needs? And then what are some solutions that we could come up with to overcome those barriers? In 2024, in March, we reconvened for part of a day to celebrate all of the great things that are actually happening and underway on the island, and then to revisit that idea of barriers. And then we asked the groups, can you come up with any kind of consensus around a set of shared goals? And just here's some pictures from these events. I know the first one in particular just took an incredible amount of creative energy in these gatherings. And you could tell people were very excited to come together and be around people they don't normally see, but they're, you know, really curious about the perspective of the national park or the perspective of this particular hotel company, or you know, just a wide cross section of people. So it was really a lot of great energy came out of this. So from the success of that 2023 summit, we created the MDI Housing Solutions Initiative. So we're like, we're not going to create another nonprofit because there are a lot of nonprofits, but we really want it to be this sort of community-driven initiative. And the purpose is to create a collaborative island-wide effort to seek creative solutions for housing on MDI, and then also a framework for addressing the ongoing need for different types of housing and to bring together these partners and facilitate a dialogue. We analyzed all the input from these discussions at the summit, and we distilled the solution ideas into 3 action areas. And those are sort of guiding the work of this initiative. So one of them is funding structures and mechanisms. How do we think about because a lot of people talked about, like, you know, the answer is we need more money, right? Well, where does the money come from? And what are some creative ways that we can think about money that does exist and how we put it to use? The next one, island-wide coordination and collaboration. So I think there are a lot of examples of lessons learned in what Raney shared. And the last one is education and communication. So people talked about the need to like, how do we create a common language for what's going on? Can we create sort of a common understanding of what's going on and do more storytelling around it? And what are people experiencing? And how do we understand the role that housing plays in our economies and in transportation in particular? And certainly there's a climate issue as well. We were really fortunate to the Maine Department of Community and Economic Development has a program right now called the Housing Opportunities Program, and they gave us funding to continue this initiative. So when we started it, it was essentially Noel and Marla and I and a few other partners coming together to put this together. So these are some of the current projects that we're working on. So community conversations like this one, and we were fortunate to get to tag along and work with Raney on this one, and professional group conversations. So we facilitated a conversation of island realtors to talk about, you know, what are the realtors seeing and what's the role of that profession in being a solution partner. GIS mapping, so that's geographic information systems. How do we kind of build on the map that Raney showed earlier? What's the next kind of iteration of that? And then where are there opportunities that might exist for additional housing? A regional housing needs analysis, that's something that we're working on currently. That would include, we work with partners in Ellsworth and Trenton. We talked about the idea of a kind of homes equals community public relations campaign. So what's the like human story aspect of the role of like what kinds of homes we have in our community and what does that mean for what kind of community we have? We're exploring a lease to locals program. And so this is something that's been piloted in other parts of the country where people who own vacation rentals are able to do a 1 year-long lease, a year-round lease, and earn the same amount of money for that 1 year. So what's the incentive to explore the idea of converting to a year-round rental if that's something that they're willing to, you know, experience? And then other regional planning initiatives that are underway. I think that's the end of my part. And I think Noel's going to come up and maybe facilitate some questions and a larger discussion about kind of shared values.
I think I'll stay over here.
Okay.
And try not to get too close to the microphone. Well, I got the easy part because I didn't have to do as much talking as these two, but I did want to bring the topic up that, you know, where we are now is really what are we going to do about this important topic? You know, housing is certainly one of the biggest challenges that we're going to face of our time, all of our times. And through the housing initiative, we're already working on some of those things that Susanne mentioned. But my hope is that we're going to learn some of the lessons that Raney brought up today to have larger conversations about the future so that actually future Raneys of the world will look back on our time and say, hey, this was really awesome what they did and how we've learned these lessons and we can apply those things, you know, for the challenges that they're facing. Hopefully it's not housing, maybe it's something else. So I think that I'd like to think about the lessons in a little bit of a reverse order as a way to facilitate, you know, an ongoing conversation, not necessarily for tonight, but as we're a community and we're out there talking to the people, to our communities, to our neighbors, to our friends, you know, how do we kind of think about those lessons? So let's first start by addressing the issues of fear and hyperbole. In my mind, maybe changing the rhetoric around housing solutions to think about them as solutions and not threats. So they're not threats to our livelihood. They're not threats to our community character. They're actually opportunities to enhance. They're actually tools to help us sustain our livelihoods and enhance our community character. So when we're in our town meetings or talking to our neighbors, the solutions that we're coming up with, I think maybe we ought to change the rhetoric a little bit. Let's also identify our interconnectedness and celebrate our uniqueness. So it's great that we have individual communities, but it's also really been a challenge to think about NDI as a larger community rather than just a coalition of individual towns. But I think that there's a way that we can have these conversations to identify what things we share in common and then start to think about how we address those needs, in relation to where we live. So let's maybe think about having those kinds of conversations. And then let's spend some time in a conversation to create a shared understanding of the problem. Do we all agree on what the problem is? Can we identify values that we share in common? So, and I think if we're lucky and we have that process using the lessons of history and maybe through this housing solutions initiative that we're all working for, we might come up with some different solutions. And so with that in mind, I think we'd really love to hear from you guys. So you don't need to listen to me talk about it, but I'm curious. I think Susanne and Raney and I are all curious about hearing from you about any questions that you have about what we talked about. And also, I'd be curious to know from folks online or in the room tonight, what are your values? What do you value about this place? Can we start to use this as the beginning part of a conversation where we can then share those values with other conversations and see what we come up with? So I've got a microphone, happy to pass it on.
Hi, I'm Diane, I live in Baja. Over 25 years ago, I was on the housing committee in Chebacco. And never got anywhere, and here we are. And what concerns me is the sustainability for the few areas that you can build on. I know we don't have infrastructure all over, and we're afraid of polluting in our Northeast Creek and the wildlife you're moving around. And so when we just passed 2003, LD 2003, I didn't want it to pass because we were in a growth area and they're taking it out next year. I was hoping they could just postpone this vote because the damage is already done now in our area because it will be out of it next year. But 2003, LD 2003 has come up with some solutions.
Yeah. Do you want me to talk about that a little bit?
I know about it.
Okay.
We don't.
Well, LD 2003 is a state law that was passed a couple of years ago. And I don't know, maybe you can explain it in April, but it's basically, it's eliminating single family zoning is sort of the big picture way to describe it, but it's meant to create additional housing opportunities by allowing for more units on a lot.
Yeah, it's reducing the regulations so that you can put more houses on a lot. You can put up to 4 in some areas. It all depends where you are, what your land use ordinance is, what your zoning is. You can do multifamily in some of them. You can do affordable housing. And if you do affordable housing, it's 2.5 times the developer can build. That's a lot of houses with no infrastructure.
Yeah, I think that's LD 2003 is an important tool. I would sort of reflect back on that as a tool that in the absence of us locally coming up with tools, the state decided this is a tool you're going to use to increase affordability. So getting back to that lesson. But I think it makes a distinction between, or it requires communities now, so all towns in Maine by July, we're supposed to have adopted these rules. Some of them haven't, some of them haven't, but it provides an opportunity for towns to say, you shall allow, a second dwelling unit on a lot, for example. And then in a subdivision context, so when you're doing a larger development, if you want to do housing that is affordable, that meets the definition of affordable, you are allowed a density bonus of up to 2.5 times the straight density that you would normally get. There's a lot of caveats to that as well. So what you can do on a lot, the lot size isn't necessarily going to change. And so some developments might not ever be able to get to that point just because of the natural constraints of a particular property. But the larger context is, there are some tools that are being handed down by the state.
One thing we hope for the Housing Solutions Initiative, it's kind of an experiment, right? That's how we sort of couched it at our last summit. And the hypotheses are, can we, if we come together as 4 towns, we would come up with locally responsive solutions that make sense for this place, right? And be able to better articulate, those needs and what that looks like.
Yeah,
But I was hoping the planning office from the state of Maine had put this together. But I called the governor's office and it was legislators, real estate brokers and developers who put this together. And I said, did you take into consideration that Mount Desert is an island? You know, sustainability and growth, and they said, no, it was just built in one package, so.
that's why I would say that, you know, the tool is, you shall allow these things, and then underneath that tool, there's a lot of analysis that has to happen to just figure out whether or not you could even do that on a particular parcel. So to address your concern about sustainability or environmental concerns, those are things that do come from the local ordinances that would further limit kind of what you can do on a property. And it's a good perspective, but the tool is there for municipalities to use in appropriate settings, where, as before, I would argue that the conversation about that would linger in a town. Rather than coming up with a solution, it would continue to be a conversation instead of having to apply that tool, or at least give people the opportunity to apply that tool. But it's a really good perspective. Yeah. Anybody else?
I've been interested for many years on the issue of housing.
Sorry, they can't hear online if you don't talk to the mic. Thank
I'm
you.
sorry.
That's okay, perfect,
I've
thank you.
been wondering about the issue of seasonal workers. I've seen a number of cases where an organization, in order to get seasonal workers, has actually purchased a year-round housing and converted it just to summer.
Yeah.
And I thought that the cost of building just a seasonal worker community of, 50 to 100 people that are going to be accommodated in relatively small bedrooms, but common areas to work and live, would help maybe alleviate some of the pressure on year-round housing. Has that been explored much?
Yes, there in Bar Harbor, I mean, they created the ability to create shared accommodations, or like dormitory style accommodations, or employee living quarters, which did not exist before. And yeah, there are a lot of organizations and institutions that are either in the act of purchasing, trying to secure, literally like analyzing, here's all the staff we employ. Is it now our mission to guarantee we have housing for all these people? Because we don't know if we can actually open up for the season this year without being able to say, here's your job offer and it comes with a place to live. So they're definitely in that position.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think that also demonstrates one of the challenges that we're trying to deal with in many different communities is, the zoning to allow that kind of development doesn't currently exist, but now it does in Bar Harbor. And so you have that, then you create the rules around that, then you have to start to look at, okay, where would those types of uses be, should they go? And then you have to deal with a lot of the issues that come with that kind of conversation. And so that sort of, in my mind, keeps reflecting back to the larger question that I keep having is, can we start to think about some shared values and understand what those are in the context of these conversations? So that is a really interesting solution. And the process of coming up with that solution involves a lot of different perspectives. And the only way to get past the town meeting vote is to try to understand what those perspectives are and then craft something that's going to balance out all of those perspectives. So that's where I think at the housing issue in my mind, there's technical solutions for how, we all know how to build houses. We know how to build roads, we know how to build infrastructure, but a lot of it costs money. But then there's a hugely emotional side of it that takes a lot more process than we're currently able to give it. All right, got a lot of questions, so I'm gonna start with that and then I'm walking back this way.
I think there are a couple of issues here. One goes back to was one of Raney's opening comments, which is we're talking about how do we sort of solve the problem, and I think the other side is how we live with the problem. Because the problem, as I understand it at a high level, is that there's not enough housing capacity for the people who would like to live here and are required to do the work to support the community. So the question is, I think the Explorer bus system helps a little bit, but are there other ways that we can find to make it either less undesirable to not live here. As a way of taking the pressure off people wanting to be here. So that's just a different way of looking at how you resolve it. Then the other question I look at is, if we had a magic wand, we could build 400 units or 1,000 units, whatever the number is, how do you allocate them? And how do you keep those houses or units that you sell to people or provide to people, how do you keep that from being a lottery ticket for them where they get a lot of money and everybody who didn't get it gets penalized?
Right, yeah, that's always gonna be an issue when you construct
And
housing that's.
there's some ideas I haven't had, but
Yeah.
I'll share them separately, but I think those are two big problem
Yeah.
and opportunity issues to consider.
Yeah, I think I'll just say like, building is one tool, but it's not the only tool, right? Just constructing a lot of new housing, it's not the only.
Well, there's
Solution.
buildings, how do you do it economically, how do you do it comfortably, how do you not create ghettos where people are totally, they don't want to live there, or they want to live there.
And how to ensure that it maybe continues to serve a certain income
Maybe,
bracket or a certain season.
maybe instead of assigning the properties to the dwellers, maybe you assign them to the employers. Work it that way.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea.
Yeah, well, we've been talking about seasonal workers. I mean, the future of this island is also at risk for people who work every day in essential services like teachers and policemen and firemen. And I was wondering whether there have been any studies looking at how many people in those fields can afford to live on the island, and whether there's any thought about affordable housing for our essential people who make this island work year round.
Yes.
Yes.
There's been a lot of thought about that, and it's very important. And yeah, Bar Harbor did a study as part of their comprehensive plan, looking very much into the details at numbers like that, and not just like the number of units, but the type of units that are needed, because there isn't a great diversity in the types of housing that is available. But yeah, there's a lot of thought about exactly that.
Well, Senator King has a proposal
Yeah,
to come up with local firemen and teachers. And he's trying to work, I can't remember what the name of it is, but he's trying to work it with maybe some people can afford it, but then they don't have the down payment. So he's working on that side about the down payment.
Right.
right.
Yeah, the state, I mean, there's a rural rental assistance program that helps incentivize the construction of rental, like affordable rental. And I know Island Housing Trust does some down payment assistance. I don't want to speak on behalf of Marlo, but.
So I would add a couple of different things to that too. One is, one of the projects that we talk about is taking some of the information Bar prepared for their housing demand analysis. We're trying to think about that. I call it a micro region, so it's like Ellsworth, Trenton, Lemoyne, and the communities. And so like this is our micro region. We're influenced by transportation and economies and all that good stuff. So what is the actual demand for housing units in those areas? We're trying to figure that out. And for a lot of people, that's a good thing because it gives us something to work toward. Are we ever gonna raise the thermometer, to get to the number that we really need? Number two, on those lines is there are projects that are being proposed that have restrictions and income guidelines that actually do cater to those people in your community that we need. There's one right over in Northeast Harbor. If you guys want to talk about it, I'd love to really get into it at some point. Not tonight.
But if you aren't aware, because I don't know all of you, but the YWCA has a really interesting project that they're working on, Hamilton Station in Bar Harbor, and Island Housing Trust is going through the steps to construct some more housing in the Ripples area. So
Let's take an online question.
So this is from Jane Connie. Island Housing Trust has been addressing these issues. What are opinions about their mission?
Is that for us, the speakers? Well, we work closely with the Island Housing Trust as like a core partner in this Housing Solutions Initiative. So they've been great support and sort of guidance but they have a specific mission. I'm not going to speak on their behalf, and I don't know if Marlo wants to be put on the spot, but there are a lot of nonprofits on this island, and a lot of them are small and competing for the same resources to do the great work that they do. And, you have to be mindful about like how much you can do and keep your kind of eye on the prize in terms of your mission.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if they're asking us specifically about this or everybody else, but I would also add, Housing Trust has been a leader in, the affordability game for a long time, including creating model ordinance or deeds restrictions that people across the state are calling to try to use to make sure that we can, if you do win the lottery, as or whatever the analogy is, that those units continue to remain in the affordability realm, as opposed to in older models where you really did win the lottery and you got a great unit, and then all of a sudden, like 15 years later, you get to sell it for whatever that market rate is. So there's a lot of value in the things that they're doing to try to help address it. And I think that's one entity in a larger pie, if I can go back to my wife's former business analogy, that really is necessary. So.
Great. And I'll just say, I think they play such a vital role because if you do try and build your way out of the problem, who's to say that housing doesn't, get scooped up to be used as a vacation rental or, in some other way. So I think by having those options for deed restricted properties, that at least you're ensuring some your own housing is available.
All right. So we have one question back here and then I'll come back up here.
This isn't really a question. I was very, very interested in your description of the three types of residents, you call them. There's the residents who basically logged and farmed and fished. And then all of a sudden there was the resident that comes for the summer, partial resident. And we did not define the third person that you mentioned as well.
Right.
That was the resident that comes for a week, 2 weeks, 3 months, or come to work for 3 months. And you need to get a handle on that.
Well, that was the summer people category. So I might have said it quickly, but yeah, so that was, yeah.
Today, there are these different music groups. What we've seen here, and I've been summering here for many years, is that the price of a house, you're saying Baja has moved to $680,000, is that correct?
It does, yeah.
For a year-round residence.
For just
And the only people that can really afford that are people who are coming here for the beauty of the island for 3 months or to retire. And that's another group that you have to deal with as well. And I think much more exploration of that has to be made. I don't think you can build your way out of this problem.
No.
And I don't think even doubling a lot will solve the problem. We must be looking at these different groups of people, and you have to decide whether this is going to become basically an exclusive island for those that can afford to live here, which is what's happening by itself, or those that lived here for 300 years and already have a piece of property and can stay, but can't maintain that population that is still growing, that wants to be here because of the beauty of the island. How you deal with this other group, the teachers you mentioned, the firemen, those that need to service all of these things, as well as those that come part-time. My question is, I don't see any real discussion of that. And my question is, there are many other towns that have become very affluent because of tourism, really, the beauty of their place. How have they dealt with it? Or have they dealt with it the same way? At 5 o'clock, everybody leaves the island and finds a place that can afford and comes back in the morning at 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
And is that the only approach, or can there be others?
Yeah, we look at case studies from other places in the country and like ski towns in particular, especially ones that are sort of physically isolated at the end of a long road up in a high valley. In other states, in particular, in exploring this lease to locals idea, the sort of key, one of the key things that allows them to come up with more creative solutions is the ability to have local option taxes. So they're able to capture money to set aside to fund the construction of affordable housing, or to, you know, pay for an incentive program. And again, none of these tools are on their own the like magic solution to fix everything, but it does allow for more creativity and the ability to meet some of those needs. And in the study that we're trying to accomplish, that builds on Bar Harbor study, we're trying to look at it on at those needs, right? Those different cross-section, those different demographics at the island scale, and then at that sort of micro-regional scale, and which needs are, you know, continually not being met, or what's the sort of trajectory of that.
Yeah, I think you've articulated the overarching challenge quite well. It's really tough thing to try to figure out.
Yeah.
You guys would you first?
I know, something, I know JB has something to say too, but one of the things we value so much, aside from the beauty of this place, is the community.
Yeah.
And we want to think that there's going to be a community where kids are born and there are industries that are sustainable. We'll keep them here. And so that's my concern. That's the heart and soul of it, and where I see it being hollowed out. And I'm not sure what the answer is, but I mean, we value that so much, and it's very difficult because you want to balance all that. You want to not destroy the beauty of it.
Right.
And yet you want to give that opportunity and have that community, and that means generations of families.
Yeah.
That know people for a long time.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Well, I don't know, has anybody analyzed the industries and talked about nurturing certain industries that might be sustainable here on the island, that would be, I mean, that we could encourage kids to go into? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there's a large economic development component to the housing issue.
Yeah, I mean, it's just.
My issue is just a more of a macro one, if there's such a thing, and that is global warming. This place is going to become more of a gem because people are going to want to get the hell out of their 120-degree towns. And I also think that we can get some learning. I mean, didn't we just almost have a tornado the other day? And New Hampshire had one. I mean, you know, these are different things the infrastructure is going to have to deal with too, which I mean, the macro is like it's way far reaching, but we've got to build better if we're going to sustain, and we've got to prepare for the influx of all the people. And I don't know how many of you have had to wait in line for traffic when there's an accident on the one route in and out of the island, and people can't get to hospital, airports, whatever, because that one road has been closed down for an accident. So I'm just saying there's a lot of things you guys got to think about, or we all have to think about, as far as how we're going to sustain in the future when there's nothing but growth on the horizon.
Well, and I would just say to that, I'm sorry, that climate refugees that are going to be a huge issue, and Maine has been already identified as a safe space for climate refugees, and we will see that influx of people more and more here. And so statewide, that is an issue that we have to contend with. I will say that in my passion for History Matters, the other work that we are really, really committed to at the MDI Historical Society is climate change and using historic records to understand the scope, scale, and speed of climate change. And so we have a number of programs and articles and resources that I can help direct you to, JB, that would start to talk about that. No, we have to pull all this together at some point. They can't be in silos, but we are also thinking about the climate change piece too.
And the other part is, at a certain point, is there any way, because I grew up remembering the fire, hearing about stories about that fire, at a certain point, when is it too many people that are so dangerous that it's really unsafe? Is there a way to limit at certain points the numbers?
Yeah, I think that's a big part.
I mean, I think that I'm scared. I don't know.
Yeah, I'll just add, we made a little website for this Housing Solutions Initiative, and I would love for you all to find it online, and like in part of the section about the why and about how it's all interrelated. It has to do with housing is a transportation issue, and it's a climate issue, and it's an economy issue. So those are sort of the three kind of pillars of framing it. Yeah.
Yeah, I have the last question, would be that as a sweet and sour note.
Okay,
And the sour note is this slide and the previous one shows it's like impossible to buy a house here for
yeah,
somebody who works here. The price tripled in the last 3 years.
yes,
And what you didn't say is the interest rates on mortgages have also roughly tripled.
yeah, it's even
So
more
that's
extreme,
almost like a factor of 10 in your monthly payment. Nobody can make that.
correct.
But still houses are selling, so who's buying that? And I looked, and the Standard & Poor's 500 index basically follows that. It's 8 times what it was 20 years ago.
Mhm.
So people have money in the stock market, want to come here for summers or to retire, it's perfect, and they could afford to do it, but not the loans. Now, the sweet part of it is, we sold our house in Lexington 4 years ago, Massachusetts. And back in Lexington, they had the same problem here. They couldn't get teachers, firemen, policemen who worked for the city in the town to live there.
Yeah,
So when schools were being decommissioned, they converted them to condominiums and they took a preference to city employees. Good prices, good mortgage rates, etc. And I don't know if that's a viable solution here.
I think that's a really
Possible
creative
to
solution.
show favorable things for people who want to basically homestead on it, you know?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting, idea. Yep.
Well, I'm sorry to say, we could have this conversation for the rest of the night, and we have this conversation literally every day. So, and I think as a person who grew up here, and having the benefit of talking with somebody who I work very closely with, who brings a wholly different perspective, but also wants to be here, I really feel strongly that it's the challenge of our time. And it's also something that we cannot give up on. So I reject the idea that, well, it is what it is, we're just gonna let everything do what happens. I reject that idea, and I hope that what we can take away from this meeting, if I can take the last word, is to come together and try to understand what our values are and what our common shared goals are. And that's the only way that we're gonna be able to start having more constructive conversations about this. I will say, we do have a website at the Island Housing, or the MDI Housing Solutions .org. So, Ms. Susanne said, feel free to.
We also,
send emails.
from the 2003 summit, we created this summary report, and it really captures all of the discussion and sort of the key ideas that people brought to the table and some of those action areas and items. So I encourage you, if you're interested, to take one of these, hand a button if you're super excited.
And also, if you haven't joined the Historical Society, you better do it for you.
Yes.